I just watched the movie The Iron Claw. What did it do well and where did it fail? Let's talk about it. Well, welcome back to New York Sports WickerMedia. I'm wccw. Thank you, as always, for taking the time to watch these videos. Quick reminder, we go live every Wednesday night at 10 p.m. Come on down and join the fun. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. Usually when we're on here, I'm talking Jets, I'm talking Rangers, Mets, whatever the case may be. But I am a big fan of pro wrestling. I've done a couple of videos in the past on pro wrestling. And I wanted to come on here for a moment and talk about The Iron Claw, the recent movie that came out about the world-famous Von Erich family. I watched it this weekend, and I wanted to come on here and give my thoughts. Now, I was already familiar with the Von Erich story. I've seen every documentary ever made on them, whether it was A Current Affair, whether it was The Heroes of World Class, whether it was The Triumph and Tragedy, a WCCW that WWE put out, Fated Glory, which was a local documentary that ran in Dallas. I basically consumed everything about this story that I possibly can because it is such an amazing human story. The highs, the lows, and everything in between. Now, I didn't watch WCCW growing up in New Jersey in the 80s and 90s. It just, I was a little bit after their peak, but I knew of them from magazines, and I certainly remember Kerry when he came to the WWF in 1990 as the Texas Tornado. I remember celebrating when he won the Intercontinental title from Mr. Perfect, and I remember literally crying at 11 years old when he lost the title to Mr. Perfect when Ted DiBiase interfered. I have forgiven the $1 Million Man for that at this point. But I was very interested in the Hollywood treatment of the story. And so often with these types of movies, the issue is, as Bob Seger said in one of his famous songs, what to leave in, what to leave out. But the main takeaway I got is, as good of a movie as it was a very well done movie. This was much more suited to be a miniseries. This was meant to be on Netflix or Peacock or Prime or whatever the case may be, and have eight episodes or so, maybe even 10, because there was just so much to the story that you couldn't really get into in a mere 120 minutes. Now, the wrestling scenes, they were limited, but they were very well done. The camera work was very good. Super close-ups. A lot of credit to Chavo Guerrero for working so well with these actors and with training them. Now, a couple of observations I took, things that I thought were done very well. The character of fritzvonerich, boy, oh boy, was he tough. I don't think there's any question he did live vicariously through his kids. Fritz always wanted to be world heavyweight champion. He was bitter that did not happen for him, and that's why he was so determined to see one of his sons win the championship. He had 6 sons. You wouldn't know that by watching the movie, though. More on that later. But they really made it seem like Fritz looked at the World Heavyweight Championship of the NWA as the end-all, be-all. It came up over and over again. And a lot of people vilify Fritz, that he pushed his kids into wrestling, that he manipulated them, some of which is very probably true. But I'll tell you what, after all the tragedy that he and his wife Doris went through, I don't know how I would have handled that much tragedy. But the actor who played Fritz, McCallany, he was amazing. He looked like Fritz. He sounded like Fritz. That was, in my mind, the best casting job of the movie. Holt, I didn't know who he was, but he played Fritz absolutely to a T. Very well done. I thought Zacefron, and I've never really watched any of his work from High School Musical on up. So, but I got to say, I thought he did very well. He played a very, very good Kevinvonerich. Of course, Kevin is the protagonist of the story, the only living brother today out of 6. Lilyjames, who played his wife Pam, in my mind stole just about every scene, but then again, I think Lilyjames is one of the most beautiful women in the world, if I'm being quite honest about it. But Sean Durkin, the producer, I thought did a great job recreating the 80s, because this really takes place during the 80s, like the early 80s, up until about 1980. It gets into the early 90s a little bit too. But yeah, recreating that atmosphere was done very well. The quality of the film was just a touch gritty, not too pretty, which makes sense for Texas wrestling in the 1980s. Great music. They did a good job there. Tom Sawyer by Rush, which was Kerry Vonerich's entrance music. Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. That was used as well. And they did a great job recreating the Sportatorium in Dallas, which was the main arena of WCCW. That was their Madison Square Garden. That was their Omni in Atlanta. That's what it was all about. And the Sportatorium was unfortunately torn down in 2003, but they did a very good job basically taking you from the outside to the entrance into the building, how the fans would get in. Also from the journey from the locker room to the ring that the wrestlers took. Very, very well done. But the thing is, looking at the Vonerich family, it really is seen through Kevin's eyes. You see the story of him meeting Pam and them having kids. They had 4 ultimately. But you wouldn't know that about the rest of the Vonerich family. You would never know that David Vonerich was married and had a child who died at birth. You would never know Kerry Vonerich was married and had a couple of daughters. Or that Mike was married. Okay? When Kevin had his world heavyweight title shot, it was said in 1986. That was portrayed as happening after Mike Von Erich died. Well, Mike died in 1987, so that was really out of order. And looking at some of the passings here, David Von Erich, they touched on that. That was done pretty much spot on. Died of acute enteritis in Japan in his hotel room. There are rumors I know out there about drugs and whatnot. The bottom line is this. David had an autopsy done, and it revealed itself to be acute enteritis. His intestines swelled, they ruptured, and it caused heart failure. Autopsies don't lie, folks. So, yeah, there are those who I think who still push the drug narrative, such as Ric Flair. More on him in a minute. But, yeah, David's passing, I think, was portrayed very well. With Mike, the toxic shock syndrome was portrayed very accurately when he had a shoulder injury in Tel Aviv. And then went back for shoulder surgery, and there were complications. He acquired toxic shock syndrome, which is typically something that women deal with. It doesn't happen all that often in men, but it took his fever to near 107, caused brain damage. He ultimately did overdose on painkillers, but there are also 2 DUIs that he had leading up to that as well. And then looking at Kerry's wreck, Kerry Vonerich's motorcycle wreck. The way this was portrayed was after Kerry won the World Heavyweight Championship from Ric Flair in May of 1984, it was portrayed that the motorcycle crash he had happened the exact same night. The accident that resulted in him losing one of his lower legs and wearing a prosthesis for the rest of his career. And that accident actually did not happen until 2 years later in 1986. Okay, so that was probably the biggest, in terms of timing, that to me was the biggest offense that the filmmakers made. And there were some more details about Kerry's passing that was not correct. Kerry was going to go to jail for violating his probation on drug possession. After the accident, he was absolutely addicted to painkillers, trying to come back in the ring, but wearing that prosthesis while being in the ring had to be absolutely brutal on him. I mean, I can't really fault Kerry for taking painkillers to get through that. It's very, very hard to do that, and it just got completely out of control. And another thing that they got wrong with it is that it was Fritz who found Kerry after he took his life. It wasn't Kevin who did that. But the biggest offense of the film to me, there was 2. One of them was the complete omission of Chris Vonerich, the youngest brother. This has been probably the biggest complaint fans have had online. And to an extent, I understand what the director said, is that it was just too many tragedies in too short of a period of time. But you can't just completely leave out a brother. You can't treat him like freaking Judy Winslow from Family Matters, okay? It was just really, really bothersome because Chris took his life in 1991 before Kerry did, okay? He wanted to be a wrestler desperately, unlike Mike. Chris wanted to be a wrestler as badly as any of the brothers, but the asthma medication that he had to take left him with brittle bones. He would get injured easily. He was very small. Even though he got pretty muscular, it was just never going to happen. But when Mike died, when he OD'd, that really messed Chris up. It's actually been told Mike left a note behind for Chris. They were super close. And he also left a supply of Placidils, which was the sleeping medication Mike OD'd on. It's a very, very powerful sleep medication, and he left Chris with a supply of Placidils if he ever chose to do the same. Sick. Really, really sick. But again, Mike had brain damage from the toxic shock. He was not in a good way of thinking. And Chris, as I said, did take his life in 1991. That was not even mentioned. Not even a photograph, not a mention, nothing. So that is pretty unfortunate. I did not like that. A couple other things I thought were interesting as far as the casting goes. Maxwell Jacob Friedman, MJF, very well-known wrestler nowadays. He was an executive producer on this movie, and he was going to portray Lance Von Erich, who was the phony Von Erich that Fritz brought in after they were losing, after David's passing, after Kerry's accident, and Mike getting sick. He felt they needed another Von Erich. But everybody knew that this guy, his name was Kevin Vaughn. He was from Washington State or something like that. Every fan knew he was not a real Von Erich. And they cut out most of his time into basically a non-speaking role where you see him in a tag match with Kevin, and that's it. But to me, Lance is an important part of the story because it demonstrates Fritz getting his way again, using his power, and being headstrong. So I thought it was unfortunate that Lance was not acknowledged. But I think probably the biggest issue, the second biggest issue people have, is the casting of Ric Flair, one of the greatest, most identifiable wrestlers of all time. Watching this was like a parody of a parody. The promo was so over the top. It was like after school special. It was so bad. It's like they took down a bunch of Ric Flair quotes from famous promos, wrote them on, and they had some like fifth-rate comedian basically say, okay, do this however you want. You know, they made him look like Ric Flair. They could dress him up. They could give him the blonde hair and everything like that. But it was like a full minute and a half of him cutting this just god-awful promo. It was hurt. It seemed to take forever. I mean, I had a birthday watching this promo, right? But the actor is so obscure. He doesn't even have a freaking Wikipedia page. Bad. The Harley race casting, that was pretty solid. The actor had the gruff voice, the costuming, that worked well as far as the casting goes too. Maura Tierney as Doris Von Erich, Fritz's wife. I thought she was okay, but she was just kind of there. Very quiet, very monotone. I guess that was her interpretation of Doris. I've never seen a video of Doris. I've never heard Doris speak. She passed away in 2015, so I guess it was just Maura's interpretation of what Doris would have been like. A deeply Christian woman, just interpreting that how she could best take it, I guess. Now, here's how I'm going to sum this up about what it's really all about. If you're looking for a movie about WCCW, about wrestling and about the angles, it's not what it's about, nor should it have been. You'll briefly see the fabulous Freebirds. You'll see Gino Hernandez briefly, Bruiser Brody, but you won't see guys like Chris Adams, Jimmy Garvin, guys like that. Or Gary Hart, who is the booker for a lot of the time. It's about the brotherhood. It's about family. It's about, it's about power. It's about all those kinds of things. Probably the scene, I'm really glad they put in the afterlife scene where you see Mike and David, who have already passed away, sitting on a dock, Mike with his guitar, David with a championship belt, welcoming Kerry as he's on a boat, basically boating up to them. And then he gets out of the boat and they all embrace in a very emotional scene. And they even include Jackie Jr., who Kevin had mentioned briefly. Jackie, the oldest brother, was very tragically electrocuted in upstate New York when he was only 5 years old. He was electrocuted at the family's trailer and drowned in a little pool of melting snow. But they portrayed basically a 5-year-old Jackie being there as well. That was a really good scene as well, and I'm glad they included it because you needed something good to sort of end the film. Of course, it ends with Kevin and Pam playing with their two sons. But Kevin had the infamous quote. It was changed a little bit for the sake of the movie. The actual quote he has was, "Once I had 5 brothers, and now I'm not even a brother." They couldn't say that because they ignored Chris the entire time. So, but that is as cold and as sobering a quote as I think you could ever have. So, to sum this movie up, my feelings on it, I thought it was very well done. There were a few flaws, and again, it would have been better as a miniseries because there were just some things you had to rush to that you wouldn't have had to if you were making this into a miniseries. So, if I had to grade it, I would give it a B+. I would recommend people go see it, but I think if you were a non-wrestling fan or if you don't know the Von Erich story, you'll be a bigger fan of it than somebody like me who knew the story and basically knew what the truth was of the whole matter. Well, those are my thoughts. Thanks everybody for watching this video. Hope you liked a little different touch with doing the movie review on the Iron Claw. I'll see you right back here with more content from you know where. The Wicker Chair.